guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video. Today we take a look at Ford's most powerful car ever made, the Shelby GT500. It's supposed to be good, but is it good enough to convert a BMW fanatic? Stick around to find out. Alright guys, so here we are with the Shelby GT500. This thing is making 760 horsepower. It weighs 4,183 pounds. Costs you about 70K base MSRP. However, you can easily spec this thing out to be over 100K. It is a rear-wheel drive platform with 7-speed DCT automatic. It's actually only offered in the automatic, which is interesting, but it is a DCT transmission, so we are expecting probably some good shifts, some fast shifting. It is rear-wheel drive, and it's actually making over 100 horsepower more than the new Ford GT. I'm gonna be upfront and honest, I've never really been a big fan of the Ford Mustangs. A little bit because of how they drive, a little bit because of the brand, and honestly, I just don't love the way that they look from like a styling aspect. However, I will say that this car looks really, really good. And from everything that I've heard, it's supposed to drive really, really well. So take everything that you've heard or learned about Mustangs in the past, erase it, because this car is supposed to handle and drive completely differently. Curious to see how this works out. I am gonna tell you whether I like it or not, and what I like about it and what I do not like about it, and we are just gonna go from there. So the outside, we'll talk a little bit about like the color and the styling of this car that I actually really do like. Mostly this video is gonna have a lot of European BMW comparisons, so forgive me if you don't like that. That's just what I know and that's where I come from. The paint is similar to like a mineral gray. It's actually a very pretty color. It has a lot of metallic flake in it, but it is like a darker graphite, stealth gray type look. The majority of Mustangs for me I just don't love the way that the body looks, but this one looks a lot better. The width of the car, the hips, everything is more pronounced on this car, and it just looks really badass. You've got Shelby up front on the splitter. You've got GT500 blacked out on this bumper support piece. You've got the Cobra. You're gonna find these Cobras all over the car, but I really like how simple this front end is. This is super, super clean to me. Now, if this was my car, and a lot of Mustang guys are gonna hate this, but I would take off all of the badging. I would just have it completely murdered out on the front end. I think that just looks cleaner, but I really do like the way that this front end looks. I really like the headlights as well. Now, these are LEDs that turn on, and the styling in general from the front end looks really good. I like what they did with this car. Hood looks super aggressive with these fins, these vents that come out. This hood, interesting enough, also has hood pins from the factory. Moving on to the side, we've got the all black. Everything is black. It's all blacked out, which I love. I can't stand chrome, so the black features look really good on this car, especially against the gray. Love the blacked out wheels. Love the ginormous Brembo brakes. These brakes are huge. So I'm gonna assume that this thing stops on a dime. Not a big fan of the stripes. I just don't like stripes in general on any car. Honestly, that's just like my opinion on it, but I know a lot of guys, especially like the Mustang guys, they love having the stripes on the cars, but those are pretty subtle, I will say, so it doesn't look terrible. Now, the back end is kind of where I really don't like this car. I love the hips. I think the hips look really good. They're super pronounced, but this is just the way that all of the Mustangs look from the back. Taillights, black in the center. And then you have the Cobra, and then you have this like black wing up top. Now, there is a track package that you can get. It is quite a bit more to option that in, but there also is like a bunch of carbon fiber stuff you can do to it. You can easily option this car out to be well over $100,000. Side profile, I think it looks pretty good. If you like Mustangs, if you like American cars, you probably love it. Probably could look a lot better if it was a little bit lower. It looks a little goofy right now with huge wheel gaps. And yeah, the only thing that really kills it for me are those stripes. Not a fan. Not a fan of the stripes. Let's take a look inside, show you guys the interior. The interior is actually pretty interesting. I first sat in this car and was pleasantly surprised. These Recaro seats are very, very comfortable. They're part leather and Alcantara, but they're soft. They have a lot of flexibility, and these are very comfortable. I could drive this car for hours and hours on end, whereas the M5 CS was extremely stiff compared to this car. Obviously the M5 CS had the carbon buckets, and that's why it was like that, but these seats are really, really nice. If you haven't sat in these seats, they're very comfortable, but they're also very sporty. Love that they are Recaro. I think it's cool that they have the Cobra on there as well. Back seats, not a ton of room, but they are there, and I suppose you could fit people back there if you wanted to, but it is tight. Other thing to note, everything in here is not electronic, it is manual. So you are adjusting the seat with this lever. Interesting, don't know how I would feel about that on a $70,000 to $100,000 car. It just feels a little cheap, being that it's all plastic. That's something that I don't really love about the interior. So sitting in the car, I really like the steering wheel. I don't love the airbag portion. I think this looks a little goofy and it's a little big and awkward, but I like the way that the steering wheel is constructed. It has the Alcantara all around it with a little bit of leather down here. It's very simple, it's very clean, and it feels like a race car. It feels sporty yet comfortable. I think this gets the job done perfectly. You have all of your electronic controls here, easily displayed. The infotainment area, it's okay to me. Some of this just feels really cheap, and I think that that's just because I'm used to BMW interiors, and coming out of a couple of M5s, they felt very luxurious. However, you know, this isn't really like a luxury car. This is more of like a sports car, but it does feel kind of cheap to me. I don't know if I'd want to be spending the amount of money that this car costs and end up with just like a bunch of plastic stuff. Like everything just feels very cheap. This actually reminds me of the BRZ that I drove. The way that like the infotainment and everything was set up with all of the vents, very BRZ-esque. The display is all digital. I like it. It looks okay. I think it could be a little bit better as far as like the shape and the way that they lay everything out. But then again, you know, maybe I'm just not used to it. Could get used to it after a while and it could grow on me. To change gears and everything, that is all done by dial. You don't have a shifter. I definitely prefer having a shifter, even if it is an automatic car. Call me a little bit old school or whatever. That is just me. Got the GT500 badge here on the dash above the glove compartment. So there are just like little things with the interior that I don't love, that I think could have been a lot better for a car that costs this much. I feel like a lot of times BMWs, Audis, Mercedes as well, they're very nice on the interior, and sometimes we can get a little spoiled with that when we hop in cars like this. Similar to when I did the R35 GTR, it just felt very cheap on the inside, like a glorified Altima. That's kind of how this feels, like a glorified Ford Fusion or something. It is interesting that they didn't offer this in a manual. I would think that this car should definitely have a manual option, just like the Supra. I think that it just makes sense. Some people are going to want this car in manual, so why not do it? All right, so to open up the hood with the factory hood pins, you're going to click in there, click in here, and then there is a lever right under here. Flip that over to the side, lift up. So the power plant here is a 5.2 liter supercharged V8. 760 horsepower is a lot from the factory. Be a little weary about how this thing will actually drive with that much power. That is a ton of horsepower. Got the supercharger right here up on top. It's got the Ford Performance strut bar in the back. So what I keep hearing from people about this car is that it doesn't handle like your typical Mustang. Now, when we think of Mustangs, the first things that come to mind are like crowd killers, uncontrollable rear wheel drive, not the best handling, sort of a boat. This is kind of what first comes to mind when we think of Mustangs. However, this one is supposed to be much different, and I'm very curious to see how it drives. Let's get you guys a start up, hop in the car, and go for a ride. to this car at all. So I do not have traction control off because I'm not trying to do Mustang things, but it still kind of wants to give out in the back a little bit. It catches itself, but it immediately lets go. The DCT transmission is fantastic in this car. It grabs really hard, it shifts very fast. I was kind of putzing around in a park back there at like low gears, low speed, and it's comfortable. Like, it changes gears when it needs to. It doesn't buck you around. It's very, very easy to drive at low speeds, which is always things with these sport cars. Sometimes they're over the top and very difficult to drive in like normal city driving situations. Not with this car. It's very easy and very comfortable. The opposite end of that, when you're getting on it, it is very aggressive and it shifts very fast and extremely hard, which are all things that you want out of the 7-speed automatic DCT transmission in this car. It does a great job. Moving on to the sound. I love the sounds. I really don't like the way that Mustangs sound in general from the outside when they are too loud, but I don't think that this car is too loud. You can obviously change the exhaust settings and they are dramatic. When you go to quiet, you can't hear anything. When you're in normal sport track, it all has a different throaty, deeper sound to it, but it sounds good. It's a good sounding V8. This car sounds really good just like this. I wouldn't change a single thing. The seats are very comfortable. They cup you very tight. I feel like I'm very secure in this position. Love the steering wheel. The only things I don't love are the nav stuff and the way that the climate controls are set up and the electronics up here. But that could be very well just because I'm not used to it. You know, I'm so used to the way that BMWs are designed that this is all like kind of awkward to me. The digital instrument cluster, I don't love it. I don't love the way that it's set up with like the long tack across. I think it looks kind of corny. That's like half throttle and the thing just, it wants to rip. You know, on the E90 M3s, when you get that downshift and you just get that crazy bite. It's got a little bit of that, man. It does sound really good. I completely understand the appeal of these cars. I understand why people buy them. I understand why people like them. It just comes down to like a style thing, really. Like, just if you're into those types of cars, you're going to like this car more. If you're not really into American cars, then like the Mustangs are just, they're just not going to be your favorite car to drive, you know, either way. Okay, I get it. Feels pretty good in the corners, like it handles pretty good. Those shifts are fast. Almost reminds me of PDK. There's a lot of excitement going on when you drive this car. A lot of things happening that sound really good and are just a lot of fun. I totally get it, man. I totally understand why people like these cars. So it obviously has different modes like track mode, drag mode, slippery mode, sport mode, quiet mode, normal mode. So you have enough there to kind of decide what type of driving you want to do with the car. Obviously a lot of these newer cars have that when it comes to the new sports cars. It's like a quarter throttle, dude. And it rips, man. This is a cool experience. I'm really glad I got to drive this car. I would have just written it off and said, nope, it's a Mustang, want nothing to do with it. But this is, I'm glad I did this. This is a badass little car, man. MSRP for the base model of this car is $70,000, and you can spec them up to be over $100,000. We are talking high-end BMW territory, M4, M3 CS territory. We're also talking Porsche territory. I just prefer those cars over this car, and even though the performance is where it needs to be in this car, the interiors are such a big part of it for me. Interior design and the quality of it and the way that it feels when you get in the car and drive it every day, that is such a huge part of owning a car, in my opinion. And this car just lacks it. It was kind of like the GTR for me. The seats and the steering wheel are the only things that I really like about this interior. Everything else, good. It's just not up to par for how much this car is. But it rips, man. It rips. I imagine this thing would take out a lot of street cars just the way it is. The way that this car feels, it still feels really big, but the dimensions of it with the very long front end, it feels kind of boat-like. And you're sideways. I mean, it's that like that. It loses traction so fast. If you are ever leaving a car show in one of these cars and you just have the urge to just light up the back end and do a fat drift and show everyone how good of a driver you are, just don't. Like, the risks far outweigh the positives in a situation like that. Not to mention, everyone's gonna be documenting it. So in the event that you do screw up, everyone's gonna know. And you're gonna be plastered all over social media and you're gonna look like an idiot. The 0 to 60 in this is 3.3. So the M5 CS was like 2.8, 2.7, somewhere right in there. It definitely doesn't feel as fast as the M5 CS. This car would have been great in manual. I don't know why they didn't offer this car in a manual transmission. I know I'm gonna get roasted for that because everyone's like, oh, you don't need a manual, it shifts so fast. But not everything is about speed, guys. Sometimes we just want that connection. We wanna feel those gears, we wanna roll through it. It's all spinning. All right, the exhaust is pretty loud when you're inside the car. If you turn it into quiet mode, like, you still hear it, but it's not nearly as loud. You lose all of the throatiness, you lose all of the rasp. You know, it's all engine at that point. It sounds good. Like, this is just kind of dumb to me. Do you guys like the dials? Does that bother you at all? Why does it bothers me? I don't know why. I'm not a fan of the dials. I think it just loses that like car characteristic. It just doesn't feel like a car. It feels like a mouse pad or something. It feels like a computer. I don't like that. Give me my car back. This is honestly a very cool car. If you are a Mustang guy, you are really into these cars, I totally get it. For me, nah. We'll talk about the things that I do like and the things I don't like just for driving it. I've been driving it for, I don't know, like 2 hours or something like that. It looks cool. It looks really cool. It is a boat, man. It just really feels massive. It feels really big. Even in comparison to the M5s that I drove, this thing feels freaking huge. And it's really not that much bigger. I think it's just the way that the car is designed and its proportions. Love the car. I think it's a fantastic car. Not for me, personally, just because I don't love these cars in general. But if you did like American cars and you were a big fan of Mustangs, I could see why this car would be at the top of your list. It does handle pretty good. Braking is on point. Acceleration feels pretty good. It doesn't feel too fast. It feels quick, but it doesn't feel too fast. It still is a 3.3 second 0 to 60 car, but at 4,000 pounds and 760 horsepower, it still kind of feels like a pig a little bit once you get past the first and second gear. And the front end just feels massive. It feels like you're carrying this huge boat up front. But again, I think that just has a lot to do with these types of cars, and they're just conditioned to feel that way typically. Interior game, not a fan. Like the seats, like the steering wheel, but that's where I draw the line. Everything else in the interior kind of falls short for me. Doesn't really feel like they put a lot of effort into making the interior a little bit nicer. For me personally, that's very important. When I'm spending a lot of money on a car, I want the interior to feel luxurious and good. I would take an M5 or M4 or M3 interior over this car as well any day. This is a 2021. We'll compare it to like a G20 or even like a G80. Those cars feel 10 times leaps and bounds nicer than this car does. Styling wise, I think it looks badass for what it is. It's just not my cup of tea. And I think that that's kind of what it comes down to. Is this car the type of car that you typically like? If you're not really like a big Mustang person, I don't know that this car is going to be necessarily the car that is going to completely change the game for you. It's still a Mustang. It still looks like a Mustang, at least in my opinion. For people who don't know a lot about Mustangs, walking up to this car, you'd be like, oh, this is just your typical Mustang, like GT or whatever. It's obviously more aggressive, but it still looks like a Mustang. Anyways, guys, this has been a really fun car to drive and experience. I want to get out of my shell a little bit more and try different cars that I typically would not drive. So I got some other ones coming up for you guys that I think you're gonna be interested in. Big shout out to the guys over at Alta Auto Group. If you're interested in buying a GT500 or any of the other cars, they will be listed on their website. Feel free to come by and check out their showroom. They have lots of options for everyone, more affordable cars, more expensive cars. They kind of do it all. So I will leave all their information down below, but that is gonna wrap up this video, you guys. Hope you enjoyed my review on the GT500 coming from a BMW fanatic. I really did enjoy this car, but I probably wouldn't buy one just because it's just not for me. Thanks again, guys, for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Love you.